We come now to section 3.5 of the introduction, and it's short, so I'll try and keep my comments short, and then in the next video I'll do a synthetic presentation of the whole of section 3 and of its place in what we've seen of the book so far. So its place within 3.5 within section 3, whose title I will recall, From Philosophy to Theory, the Science of Ordinary Man. In section 3, as we've said several times already, Laruelle gives 5 criteria of demarcation between philosophy and the human sciences and theory, what he's doing, or the science of ordinary humans. And these 5 criteria, I'll say just the positive terms, are: theory is naive, real or absolute, that is to say non-hypothetical or an-hypothetical, theoretical, descriptive, and human. So I said that looking at that, in appearance, the odd one out is theoretical. All the others, naive and hypothetical, descriptive and human, all seem to go in a what we could call in the direction of anti-philosophy, and in terms of an anti-philosophical critique of philosophy. But seemingly the odd one out is theoretical, and that changes our perspective on the 4 other criteria. And we're going to see that in criterion number 5, which is that the science of ordinary man is human rather than anthropological. So we're expecting Laruelle to talk about the human, a principle of humanity even, although whenever he talks about a principle to describe his own system, he says it's not a principle strictly speaking. The strictly speaking is meant to make us take the leap to the transcendental level. So that's what we could be expecting. Finally, so 5, finally, unlike the sciences of man, which are only anthropological and usurp the title of human, the transcendental science of individuals is human, in inverted commas, because of its very scientificity. So we're getting the confirmation that we have to leap up to the transcendental level. We're talking about a transcendental science, more specifically the transcendental science of individuals, and he's put the human in parentheses, which will take away later, as he's mainly not put human in parentheses before, because it's not meant in the ordinary sense. Human is not meant in the ordinary sense as an anthropological predicate, but as something else. And he's tying together human and scientificity. So, in a sense, that's a callback to the forward, where he was saying that the problem with philosophy is that it's not rigorous enough, so it's not scientific. If you identify, as Laruelle does, rigor with scientificity, and philosophy is not human, and, as he says, for the same reasons. That means you need a unified, integrated, reconciled perspective of science and humanity, rigor and humaneness, reason and affect together. The science of people must be written the science of, in parentheses, people. So once again, we're getting the idea that the of is not the of that means about. It's not a science about people that will be taken as an object in Laruelle's terminology. It's a science that belongs to people, or we could say science and people co-belong in a transcendental identity. They are its inalienable subject without any object. So it's an inalienable subject, as we're saying, they co-belong, science and people. And so it's a science that would be somehow, to use his other formulations, nothing but science, and so nothing but human, nothing but subject. The theoretical and the human have always been opposed, but far from opposing their communal essence, we merely oppose prejudices that are transcendent and devoid of phenomenal rigor. So, once again, he's refusing the idea of the terms that he's been using as criteria of demarcation. He's refusing the ordinary usage of them of these terms as predicates. He's in number 3, I think. He went to some pains to say theory and the theoretical are not predicates, and all the rest of the criteria, that is to say, naivete, and hypotheticality, descriptivity, and humanness, they're not predicates. They're to be understood in a transcendental sense, and so the transcendental does not contain predicates in the sense of the known predicates of the eternal circle of the anthropological encyclopedia. So he's identifying the human and the theoretical, which is not at all, I would think, it's not at all an anti-philosophical position, in the sense of anti-philosophy is against dead thought and for lived experience, against the intellect that alienates us and kills our bodies and souls and so on. So he's dispelling any illusions that we could have had that his project is an anti-philosophical project in the sense of anti-philosophy. So which leaves us a little up in the air. What does he mean by theory then? I think a useful way of thinking about it is not so much the word science. I think that's a bad choice to describe of a word to describe his new paradigm and his new thought. A more neutral word would be noesis. So he's constantly opposing noesis and cognition. So empirical science would be cognition, and transcendental science, the science he's aiming for, would be noesis on that terminology that he doesn't employ. In reality, man is the only living being there is that is nothing but theoretical. So man is nothing but theoretical, nothing but theory. And there are perhaps two ways of taking that. One way, which would be probably the wrong way, because it would amount to an empirical claim, is that nowhere, wherever we look, can we find or will we find in the future a being that is sentient to the point of noesis, to the point of humanness. So there's nothing like human beings anywhere, not on the earth, and maybe not in the universe. So that's an empirical question. Maybe one day we will discover aliens or extraterrestrials that are nothing but theoretical. The other way of taking this sentence would be as sort of a definition, but maybe a definition in terms of an essence, so that if we did discover on our planet or elsewhere sentient, noetic, nothing but theoretical beings, we will be obliged in Laruelle's definition to call them humans, which might have not just epistemological but political consequences. But once again, they're all, for the moment, they're all empirical questions within the anthropological difference. So it seems to me that he's going out on a limb there, or he's just being definitional, and then he's got the problem of how is his system not just one big circle the way philosophy is. If it's true by definition, the man is the only living being there is that is nothing but theoretical, and anything we discover to our surprise that is also theoretical and nothing but theoretical will have to be called man or human. That will be a circle, and so he's got a hard choice between the empirical and the circular reading of this sentence, and how is he doesn't seem to have considered that there's a problem there. So how he would decide on that one is still up for grabs. So man is a living mystical being. That's put forward as a synonym of being nothing but theoretical. and then he's got a colon, as if this is an explication or an explicitation of a mystical living being. The unreflective contemplation of, in parentheses, himself is his essence, though not the entirety of his relations to the world. So that's a callback to the 5 human theorems at the beginning of the introduction, where in his deduction, number 2, man is a mystical living being, condemned to action, a contemplative being, doomed to practice, though he does not know why this is the case. So, man is mystical, man is contemplative, and nothing but contemplative and nothing but mystical, is the same as man is theoretical and nothing but theoretical. So man is contemplation, man is theory. Man is mystical contemplation, that is theoretical contemplation. So we're not necessarily going around in a circle in this part of his series of affirmations, as long as we're understanding theoretical as that which overflows and over determines philosophy by means of concepts that are unbound within philosophical circles. So theoretical for me must mean conceptual. Laruelle is constantly using concepts. He's constantly thinking and doing theory here in this book up to now. And so in that sense, we may, I don't like doing it, but in that sense we may call it science in the sense of transcendental science, and thus noesis. So that would be the way out of the objection that this is just a set of synonyms going round and round in a circle. He continues on that line. So number 5 was supposedly about human as the 5th criterion of demarcation, but it turns out to be about theory. So theory eats up all the other criteria. There is no theory but human theory, not in the anthropological, but in the individual sense of these words. So there's maybe anthropological theory. The human sciences have theories, philosophy has theories, but they're not human theories because of their conceptual indigence and incoherence and carelessness, and they're not human theory because of their practicality, that instead of having a reconciliation of reason and affect, we have a mixture of theory and practice. And that's the best that anthropological philosophy and sciences of man, anthropological thought or unitary thought within the anthropological difference. That's the best it can do to mime or approximate to not the mixture of theory and practice, but the reconciliation of reason and affect, of rigor and the human. So what? Is this convincing? I'll go into that more in the next video, but there's just a particular point that we can bring up already. Laruelle is placing a lot of emphasis on the distinction between science and anthropology. And one may wonder just how founded that distinction is at the time he's writing. So what does he have in mind when he's he talks about the human sciences, the social sciences? Is he thinking about Levi-Strauss in anthropology, and what is he thinking about in the other sciences, the other human sciences? Is he thinking about cybernetics and cognitive psychology? It's unclear what he's thinking about, and so one may wonder if he's missing something. That the anthropological difference is one thing, the anthropology as an empirical and sociology and psychology and so on, as empirical instantiations of that thought or that structure are another. So the anthropology or anthropology in the transcendental sense is a conceptual character that allows Laruelle to synthesize a large number of impressions and analyses and arguments, and yet at the same time his practice of semantic assent and not giving examples may have a fatal flaw, or not necessarily fatal, may have what can we call it? What sort of flaw is bad but not fatal? May have a crucial flaw that maybe he can get over later, and I will put that in relation with the fact that at that time, so remember he published this book in 1985. At that time, the sociology of science and the anthropology of science, so empirical studies, so just anthropological difference for Laruelle, but the anthropology of science and the sociology of science had been well underway in their development and had potentially radical consequences for the ordinary conception of science. So had consequences for the conception of the human sciences, and I suppose Laruelle would have welcomed that, but had consequences for the notion of the natural sciences as well, and so for the notion of scientificity. And maybe Laruelle would have been uneasy with that sort of relativization of science, wondering how far could that go. There was the weak program of the sociology of science that was merely studying the institutions, the interactions, the social distributions of scientific research, and the strong program was trying to study as well the actual content of scientific theories and the processes of their validation as social processes just as much as cognitive processes. So at that time in France, in Paris even, Bruno Latour had already published Laboratory Life, had just published the year before, I think, 2 books on Pasteur and the micro revolution that could have made Laruelle think twice before claiming, as if it was obvious, that that's a valorizable thing to claiming scientific status for his own thought. Also at that time, and no doubt Laruelle was even more aware of him, Bourdieu was doing his sociology of the cultural and intellectual and university field. Bourdieu had published the year before Homo Academicus, which takes on some of the functionings and dysfunctionings of academia that Laruelle discusses in the foreword, and by implication with his methodological analysis of the various failures of and flaws of the human sciences, takes on similar points or arguments even to what Laruelle was trying to do, but from a sociological point of view. And Bourdieu was not a member of the strong program. Bourdieu always came out in favor of science, but in favor of, well, everybody's in favor of science in France, but in favor of the strong value of science as being absolutely demarcated from non-science and pseudoscience. And Bourdieu, maybe here Laruelle would have had a difference with Bourdieu. Bourdieu was arguing, he was being non-reflexive about his own sociology. He was arguing that his own sociology of the cultural field, and so of the academic field, and so of the sciences that could come under his purview, Bourdieu was arguing that this sociology had scientific status. So there is a book by, I think, a disciple of Laruelle called Bourdieu and Laruelle, so reflexive sociology and non-philosophy, but that was published in 2003. So with an awful lot of hindsight that Laruelle did not have access to at that time. He was in the intellectual fermentation. He was, conceptually speaking, he was at the center are the cutting edge of the intellectual fermentation of the 80s or the mid 80s, and so at the same time he was doing his noesis of that point in intellectual history, and so this whole idea of the relation between science and philosophy and the human sciences and anthropology was up for grabs at that time, and Laruelle, with this book, a biography of ordinary man, was trying to pose the problems in as radical a fashion as he was able to at that time.